Good afternoon from Singapore, and also a big hello to all our friends tuning in from all other parts of the world. Thank you and welcome to today's session where we will be talking about AI and the future of education. My name is Wei Min from SGInnovate, and for those who may know, SGInnovate is a government-backed deep tech investor and company builder whose mission is to help entrepreneurial scientists build deep tech startups that are looking to solve big global problems. Our work also involves building a global community of leaders, thinkers, and doers to drive and scale up big tech innovations in areas such as AI, healthcare, quantum tech, and autonomous technology across various industries. Now, on today's topic, we'll be diving into the world of AI in education. In Singapore, I think most of the time when we hear the word education, my guess is that the first thing that comes to our minds are like our mainstream schools, like O-levels, A-levels with subjects such as math, science, etc., all the way to poly or to university. However, today we'll be taking things beyond that. Education is about facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values in all aspects of life. This is especially relevant in the digital age where self-learning can be done through multiple online platforms for reskilling and even picking up of deep tech related skills such as AI programming and blockchain courses. Just to name a few, of course. We are glad to have partnered with KIMO today to bring you today's session where our speakers will further share on how can the industry various players come together to create value for consumers in their pursuit of education through the use of AI. Now, for today's webinar, we encourage for all attendees to share with us your thoughts on the topic or to interact with our speakers by posting your questions in the Q&A tab located at the bottom panel of your screen. Otherwise, feel free to just say hi and do a quick shout out from where you are in the chat box below. With no further ado, do allow me to invite Ms. Kang So-Young, founder and CEO of Nobi, to start off the session. So-Young, please.
Thanks, Wei Min, and so delighted to be here with all of our guest speakers today from Renz, Peter, and Simon, and we're really looking forward to really chatting about AI, tech, the future of education, in the context of lifelong learning. And so I'm actually very excited to learn from my fellow panelists here and as we have this discussion. So just to frame the conversation today, I think many of you would have read some of the future of education and skills reports. And I think that people are now calling us, it's the new skills economy. It's no longer about the degrees and the certificates you have, but about the tangible skills that you can demonstrate on the job. And according to the World Economic Forum, we know there are 100 million new jobs that are going to be created through automation and technology, and 85 million jobs that are going away. So there's often a fear associated with AI and technology because people look at the 85 million number, but there are more new jobs being created by technology as well. And so then it's absolutely critical that we don't have an unemployability issue, which is that the 85 million people don't have the skills to then take the 100 million new jobs that are being created. So there's actually an increasing job gap between those things. So today we're going to be looking at, across the whole spectrum of lifelong learning, how do we continue to close that gap between the jobs that are going away, the new jobs that are being created, and all of the skills, mindsets, and things that are required in order to close that. And so with us today, we have Renz, the CEO of KIMO, who will be talking a lot about AI and showing us some pretty cool stuff that I think we'll be looking forward to seeing in terms of how that really relates to skills mapping with jobs. Peter, of course, is joining us from Ericsson, Global Head of Learning, and really talking a lot about the ease, making learning easy. And I really love that from an enterprise perspective, because having done a lot of work with companies and enterprise, we don't always think about making learning an easy experience. And then Simon is joining us from Novartis. And I'm actually curious to talk to Simon about his book that he's just launched called The Curious Advantage. And really about the uniqueness of what makes us human and how we can compete with AI. So with no further ado, and my name is So-Young. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. The founder and CEO of Nobi. We are really innovating in the micro learning and micro authoring space to make content so easy for anyone to create, but to create it in very human ways that develop the 21st century skills that we're talking about in creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. So we don't think learning should be a passive experience, and so it should be an interactive experience. And so with that, I'd love to just kick things off with having our speakers just introduce yourselves and why are you here today and talking about this topic? Rens, want to start?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. Pleasure to meet you. I see a lot of people already commenting. So my name is Rens. I live in Amsterdam, and KIMO is also based in Amsterdam. I'm a former strategy consultant that at some point realized that it's probably more fun to be in the AI space, and then try to reskill myself towards that space, which turned out to be extremely difficult. So I did 40 or 50 MOOCs, I think, and found out that maybe that process can be improved. And that's how KIMO originated and how my interest got going. So very happy to be here and to talk to you.
Thanks, friends. Same, I have the same experience as you. Simon, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, So Young. So Simon Brown, based in Basel, Switzerland. I'm Chief Learning Officer at Novartis, a focused medicine company with 110,000 people around the world. And also, as So Young says, recently released a book, The Curious Advantage, which talks about some of the Novartis story, but also more broadly around the benefits of curiosity. And we'll be drawing on some of the things in there for the discussion today, as well as about 25 years in the learning world in various different guises of in-house consultancy, startup, and so forth as well.
And I'm looking forward to reading your book, Simon. So,
fantastic.
Peter.
Okay, thanks, So Young. Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Shepard. I head up our global learning ecosystem in Ericsson. And if you don't know Ericsson, then we're around 120,000 people. We're one of the main companies responsible for building mobile networks around the globe. And actually, AI is pretty important to us as a company as well. But it's actually becoming increasingly important for us in learning as well. I'm going to be interested to speak about this today, but also about how we're trying to make learning easier in Ericsson.
Awesome. So as you can tell, I think we have kind of a mix of experiences here, from the technology side to really the design of ecosystems and the application down to the employee or the front line, the person at the end, the receiving end of that learning. So just to kick things off, and in no particular order here, and anyone feel free to jump in, what are you seeing in terms of the upcoming trends, as we think about technology, AI, and the future of learning and education? So, I think we're talking about learning from a lifelong learning perspective. And what are you seeing that's very, very exciting in your spheres?
Yeah, happy can kick us off, and I know Peter and Rens have lots of views on this as well. So I guess overall seeing an acceleration around skills, and therefore the challenge with companies of how to keep up with that, and individuals as well. When we wrote the book, we cited some data from Gartner around how 19% of the skills that we all have today will be irrelevant in 3 years' time. And even in the last 18 months, 2 years, that data has got even more extreme. Now it's 26% of the skills that we all have will be irrelevant in 3 years' time, which is quite scary, that nearly, over a quarter of the things we all rely on every day in 3 years' time are going to be irrelevant. And then the other side of things, new skills coming, and AI probably falls into some of those new skills. And now it's up to 46% of people have learned a new to world skill in the last 3 years. So nearly half of us have learned that. And the trend is that that's just getting faster and faster and faster. And so how, as organizations, we keep up with that is a big challenge. And there's a lot of investment in technology to support that, and AI playing a key role in that, to understand the skills that are needed in the future in terms of sort of prediction of skills, the skills that are required for a particular job. So how do we understand what a job needs, and doing that manually versus doing that using AI. There's some benefits certainly in using AI to do that for the scalability, and then understanding the skills we all have. So how do we assess our own skills to know whether that fits for our job or for a future job? And then we have thousands or sometimes even millions of different learning options or opportunities, and how do we understand all of those and which skills they help to develop? And that's all an enormous task, and if you do it just from a human perspective, becomes unmanageable. So there's an opportunity there, as I see it, for AI to solve the complexity of getting the right learning to the right person at the right time for the role that they're doing or for their future role aspirations. So it's a very exciting area at the moment to be looking at.
Yeah, and I would concur with a lot of that, Simon. I think some of the figures that you see banded around today, you know, there is, I think it's the PwC CEO survey says that something like 74% of CEOs are worrying that they haven't got the skills that they need for the future. One of the ones that I really like is that I think it came from US statistics that 65% of our children will have jobs that don't exist today. So everybody is, and I think corporates are starting to be concerned about skills and how we can actually upskill and reskill quicker than we've ever needed to do. And that actually means that we have to have a better understanding of what the skills are that we have in an organization against the skills that we need in an organization, in our organizations. And actually those data insights are becoming increasingly important. And that's where I think AI can help us tremendously in trying to get there. Because it starts to become important that you have real skills taxonomies that are really effective across organizations. I think, though, there are other trends as well. I think there are trends around what I call actually the variety engine. In learning, we've tended to go from bounce from one piece of technology to deliver learning to another. You know, we started with classroom learning, we then went to e-learning, we then went to video. And actually, it's not that one is necessarily more important or better than the other. It's more that we need this. I think the people in our organizations need more variety and more insights through different methods. And then I think it's also a little bit about AI is important for helping learning to find us. We are increasingly intolerant, I think, of having to spend lots of effort and time searching for the right learning. So it's now about how effectively can the right learning find you at the right time? And that actually is another point where AI is the only way to really, truly automate that. And what we tend to see is different organizations and suppliers having different levels of capability in this. So those are my insights and around future important trends.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, let me add to that. I think it was captured, but under the hood, right, below what Simon and Peter said, there's this whole AI trend, which is for a large part NLP, so natural language processing, and the current transformer models that create this precision, right? Whether it's predicting the right skills that belong to a certain job, or it's predicting the right content for a person at the right moment in time. A lot of that sort of is built on top of innovations in the AI landscape itself and better models.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, related to that conversation, and when we think about AI and technology, and I appreciated, you know, Peter, that you were talking also about some of these other things around multimodal learning, right? And the idea that it's not just about one kind of approach to learning, but a multiple modes, multiple delivery mechanisms. So, you know, how do we think about, how do we stay human in that process with AI? And this is an open question, right? Because I think we have seen the Twitter feeds where if you were to have Twitter teach you, you know, you would create really angry humans, angry and very, very critical. And I think, you know, they actually used AI for Twitter and realized it was a complete disaster. So how do we think about AI in the context of learning, where things are delivered to you, where you don't stay in your own echo chamber of thoughts and ideas, because by right, learning should be a diverse process.
Can kick us off, and I know Rens has got some great examples on this as well.
Go for it, Ren.
I'd like to just dive right into the heart of things. You know what I mean?
That's good. I mean, this is one actually we cover in the book around the importance of curiosity, because it helps us to actually question things and not take that echo chamber of just, you know, my own views and maybe what an AI feed is giving me. And we talk in there around the importance of a community and being able to actually find people who have different opinions, who can actually, we talk about the role of a provocateur, who can actually give you that challenging view, that alternative perspective, and mean that you actually have that breadth of understanding. There is a challenge otherwise, that as AI feeds get more sophisticated in narrowing it down to what you're interested in, that actually you do end up with that echo chamber of just reinforcement. And maybe that's a nice mix to Rens for some examples of that as well.
Yeah, so Young, there's actually there's more than one issue here. So the first one is, of course, that, you know, if you build a recommender system, like what we're trying to build is a recommender system that covers all providers and all content types. But it would still use some kind of labels, right? People liking content A more than content B, and therefore content A would be recommended more. And the issue, of course, would be if everybody only gets content A, that might create issues. So there's a curation challenge, which is big, and I think it's there for a lot of online players. But there's more, because if you try to build AI to teach people things, and for example, you build mentors, AI mentors that can answer questions, then generally you need to train it on a lot of data. For example, Wikipedia, plus all the articles on Mediums and all the books from a couple of providers. And the sentiment tends to be very negative. So we have a Q&A model on the website that knows a lot of answers to questions, but it also quite often insults people. So then I wake up and I have my inbox full with people claiming that they were insulted by our chatbot, and that is actually true, because the system tends to be sort of negative in the sentiment. So it's better to ask it topic questions, not ask anything about yourself, because it's bound to be a negative conversation, and it's a big headache, and it reflects I think more the internet than the modeling capacity. So there are multiple issues there.
Yeah. No, it's sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, look, for me, it's about a partnership between human and AI, and one of our goals in Ericsson is that, you know, we want to create a habit of learning across the business. And that's and you don't create that kind of culture of learning just by having an adaptive learning platform or having an LXP. You know, it doesn't kind of miraculously come the next day. And of course, that needs to be combined in terms of building that habit of learning, which I think is important. And that kind of speaks a little bit to Simon's whole book around curiosity as well. But, you know, you see, you know, if you take the chatbots area, you know, we've built some chatbots, and a lot of it comes from human input. When you look in the whole area of simulations, you know, we're looking at the moment at how, you know, we are using technology for simulations at the moment. And I think some of the more interesting simulation technology is where we're using virtual humans to actually take people through simulations with no humans involved. But when you look at it closely, what exists in the background, of course, is that the humans have built the decision trees. So it's always going to be a partnership, I think, between humans and AI.
No, I agree. And in fact, you know, one of the reasons why, you know, we embarked on KNOBI as well. KNOBI stands for Grow Knowledge into Being, because knowledge is one part of learning, but the doing and the skills ultimately is linked to your being, which is, you know, where your values and your decision trees come from. And, you know, should you make a right turn, you know, if you have a grandma and a child, like, who do you kill? Like, you know, and you had to swerve, right? You know, so you have all these ethical issues that come up. And the idea of this being, you know, it's not one answer. And the complexity of this, so when we think about AI and the future of learning, is all about how do we foster environments. And I think we're talking a little bit about culture now, and how do you create cultures of curiosity and of constant learning. And I know, Simon, you're talking a lot about that, and, you know, AI versus curiosity. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your perspective on AI and curiosity, and and how you see that as kind of the human factor in that as well.
Yeah, I guess there's sort of multiple aspects to there. So there's sort of how AI can feed your curiosity, which is a bit of what we talked about of the technology aspect. But then there's also that curiosity is one of the things that actually AI is less good at, of actually making those abstractions from different areas. So having the curiosity to not just learn within your subject, but actually to learn broadly and ask questions is something that's very hard for AI to do. So I guess the notion of curiosity is, I wonder if this, or, what if we were to do that? And then actually putting that into action through testing things out. And those questions are what will, I think, differentiate us ultimately as humans, because those can be really bold, can be really abstract, but can then bring enormous value. We have a podcast on the that goes with the book, and we were interviewing the CEO of Abbey Road Studios in the UK, where the Beatles used to play, and we were talking about creativity and curiosity and examples from there. And she came up with a fantastic example of creativity and curiosity, which was there was a famous band in there playing away, and they sent one of the engineers out to go and get some chicken bones, because their curiosity was, I wonder what it would sound like to play the drums with chicken bones. And it's that sort of abstract thought. You're never going to get that from an AI. That's the human thing, and they ended up getting exactly the sound they wanted by playing the drums with these chicken bones. So there's always going to be a role for humans to be curious and to bring our own creativity, our own ideas into things. And it's sort of in a corporate role, what's the equivalent of playing the drums with the chicken bones? What's the crazy idea that actually is going to get you exactly what you want out of it? So.
No, I love that. So I'm a musician, right? So I'm thinking about like all these random things, whether you use your pens or paper, whatever you use to create sound. And I love that element. And, and Renz, you shared with us a little bit about your skills taxonomy. And what I loved about it was it wasn't just technical skills, right? Would you mind sharing maybe, how you're thinking about, not just the technical skills, but some of these softer skills and these other experiences when you think about that in AI?
Yeah, so actually, the main thought is to sort of move beyond a fixed taxonomy, right? So what has classically happened is, and I think on all fronts, government level, but also in corporations, is that you have some kind of fixed taxonomy. So you have a job, and then you have like three, let's say, competencies, and then you have like maybe 3 or 5 skills per competency, or some kind of logic like that. That tends to be very rigid. It tends to be hard to change. It tends to be not accurate enough, and that was true. I think even in European and US databases, because we started in KIMO by trying to model this with government data, and we couldn't because the data was just too light and not deep enough. So the new way of doing it is technically recognizing skills real time in job profiles that are on the web, right? Which is a very granular and real-time approach. You could search for very granular skills. Is it fine if I share my screen?
Yes, please. I was actually.
Then I'll just share it.
Share this.
Easier, because I think it makes more sense if I just share a couple. Here we go. Yeah. So 2 jobs from the web, and what you're going to see here is it looks complex, but in reality, it's actually very simple. These little blocks are the skills that are detected in this job profile. So for example, this is a front-end developer, I think in the Netherlands, and this is a machine learning engineer in the Netherlands. We just take a couple of million of those profiles, which are on the web. And the system then sort of labels or finds these skills inside those job profiles. Major benefit is you don't need a fixed taxonomy. It's real time. And of course, you can then cluster these, like, are these hard skills, are these soft skills, are these degrees? You can enrich this as well. So you can add salary data, you can add automation risk data, so you can enrich these profiles. And of course, you could ask people some questions about their job to also enrich these profiles. But I think the key thing is you don't need a full taxonomy. It's almost instant. You put in your job title and the region, and you would get a first assessment of the skills that are relevant for that job.
Yeah, I love that. And interestingly enough, we're one of those companies, we tried to do a skills taxonomy. So we started there, and very rapidly we realized, no way, there's no way we're going to create a skills taxonomy. First of all, because it's impossible to create. It's like this amorphous thing that's constantly evolving. And if there are 100 million new jobs, you and I, who knows what that future 100 million jobs are going to be. So
yeah, and combine it with, and combine it with the story from Simon, right? Where if it's changing all the time, then it's even, it becomes very messy very quickly. So you need something that is automatically updated and is not done by human beings.
No, I love it. I love it. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah. Last year, I think we were talking about, the micro-learning is a very new space, right? So even in the whole e-learning space, micro-learning is is kind of a recently new trend. And then people kept saying, well, how do you do micro-learning? How do you do instructional design and micro-learning pieces in really fun, interactive ways? Should we just do video, text? Because that's what we're used to in the e-learning space. We said, well, no, on a smartphone, you have so many different functionalities. So then, well, how do we do that? How do we do storyboarding in micro-learning? And so we ended up having to create a new job called a micro-learning instructional designer. And that job didn't exist. And that's an example of new jobs that are being created, which we didn't even predict that we were going to start, right? And so I think there is this whole idea of new skills that are being emergent. And so, Peter, I know you were going to share, but I wanted to also tie this back to how you're making learning easy, given how complex this is.
Yeah, maybe I just got to come in though on what Rens is talking about, because I think it's really important in terms of, and I think the piece that is really important, whether you are as mad as we are in Ericsson that we want to go for updating our complete skills taxonomy, which we are trying to do at this point. But what really matters is that we have what we call a skills engine, i.e. that you have the ability to dynamically update your skills taxonomy in a constant way. And that means that you have to have automation. So the days of kind of manually managing skills taxonomies are kind of heading fast away, because there is the skills that are changing within jobs is just happening too quickly. And the ability to connect skills to one another, i.e. skills to skills, i.e. skills adjacencies, is important, because people need to be able to see if I'm in this job of micro-learning developer or whatever, what are the skills that are close and connected in there? And also we need to have skills are connected to multiple jobs. So actually our jobs are becoming more transferable within organizations as well. Because suddenly we're starting to share, you're seeing finance skills, not just within the finance team. You're seeing it all over the organization. So people's jobs are starting to become more transferable. So a dynamic skills engine is becoming a critical part, and that is undoubtedly enabled by the sorts of work that Rens is doing and AI engines.
Absolutely. And, and given the complexity of all of these things, right? Because I love the idea of the evolving skills engine, right? It's this evolving kind of concept, which I think is the future of how we think about learning. And I want to pause for a moment, because I think there's some assumptions about how we're talking about learning and the definition of learning. Because I think when we talk about the definition of learning, we tend to think of it in terms of this, I take a class, unfortunately, from the first industrial revolution, we were somehow taught that learning was, I go to school and I pass a test. Now, what all of us are talking about right now is something very different from that. So just, given the fact that, we have a global audience here, how do we think about now this definition of learning in a very different kind of way, given this evolving skills taxonomy, AI recommending things to me, I have to be curious, right? So how are we thinking about even the definition of learning in the modern, like in this current context?
So was chatting with John Hagel for a podcast the other day. So he was Deloitte Center for the Edge for a long time. He's written a lot of best-selling books, particularly sort of looking to the future and where things are going. And he defined learning in a way that was really interesting for me, that I'd not thought of it in that way before, but I think is really helpful. And he was saying, when he talks about learning, it's not so much about learning from existing knowledge, but it's learning to create new knowledge. And I thought that was a really interesting distinction. And personally, I think it's both. But I think the recognition of actually learning being around creating new knowledge is a really interesting one, with all of the things we've talked about, of the acceleration and so forth, of how do we learn new things that haven't actually been learned before, haven't been discovered before. That's the sort of curiosity, the experimentation, the trying things out. And in a very ambiguous, fast moving world, we can't go to a book from 20 years ago and say, well, here's the process and we just follow X, Y, Z, and we do that. Things are more complex, so we need to figure it out. And therefore we need to learn new ways. And then we need to share that new learning that we've created quickly across organizations, or even across the world, outside of organizations. So I thought that was a really interesting, different view of learning, of actually not just learning existing knowledge, but actually how do you learn to create that new knowledge.
I love that. I think Peter, you were going to say something, or Rens, was it?
Yeah, I was just going to say that for me, it almost goes beyond the ability to create new knowledge. It goes beyond the ability to put it to actually build your skill. And I think we've been looking for many years, and as all my years in learning, where to look at what's the impact of learning. But actually what matters and what learning is all about for me is enabling skills progression with whatever end you have in mind, whether that's your personal impact, whether that's the ability to create more career opportunities for yourself. So for me, it's about that skills progression. Enabling that skills progression, but enabling us to do that in all sorts of different ways. So, and one of the most important ways actually is about gathering the right experiences. And that's why things like talent marketplace platforms are becoming so important, because they're helping, again, they're utilizing AI to kind of match people's skills to the opportunities that are out there. And once people start to get that actually building, you don't just build skill through learning content, you build it through experiences, then that I think is a really important new way of looking at learning as well.
Yeah. And I think so, Young, building on this last thing that Peter said, right? This is one of the things that we find with the people that we have test users, of course, that come in and that tell us about their issues with learning. But some of the issues are very, very fundamental. So what should you be doing in the first place? So what's the right direction? Should I study AI, or should I study blockchain, or should I do finance? Like there's a lot of questions about like psychological questions, coaching questions. And I think these talent marketplaces, but also the ability to actually show, hey, these jobs are in demand, these are the skills necessary for these jobs, also make it easier to see what you're actually going for and what's possible there, versus having a vague thing in your mind that maybe this could be the right direction. This might actually be quite a bit clearer, I think, in the future.
Absolutely. And I think the whole idea of, we talk about, the skills gap analysis and the things, that AI can definitely help us with. And I love the stuff that you're doing, Rens, in terms of mapping that and data mapping with graphs and neural networks on that. And then the question then is, for the next step is, how do you then go and develop those things? And what I love about, I think, Peter, what you're saying is that they're experiences, and some of these things are a little bit intangible. How do we even quantify the ability to communicate well with someone and have the curiosity? So if you're in a new place, in a new situation, and we call it resilience, we call it adaptability. So there are ways of talking about some of these things, but I don't even know if we fully even defined the nuances of what these things mean in context, right?
Yeah, I think there is starting to be more of a role that AI is playing in some of those areas as well. So whether it's Microsoft Passive Analytics that sort of works in the background to understand what's going on in the organization and can provide insights using AI, or whether it's particular use cases. So there's a company we were talking to recently who has essentially an AI engine that analyzes presentation skills. And so you upload a short video and it analyzes against the best speakers in the world, sort of the top most popular TED Talks, etc. And it comes back and says, based across all these different criteria that make up a good presentation, you didn't engage with the audience here. You could be clearer and crisper in your points here. So it is using AI to analyze soft skills and potentially quite difficult to work on soft skills and give you back that feedback in a very objective way, rather than an opinion of a coach who may or may not have the same view on what good looks like. So I think we're starting to see AI actually get more sophisticated at assessing some of those skills and providing meaningful feedback on them.
Absolutely.
And Simon, I see Bibi on the chat. It's pretty scary, Simon. So, but Bibi, maybe for your understanding, and I think there's actually quite some apps already in this space. There's even apps that do, if you do a workout and you do crunches, that will actually tell you if you do the crunches correctly or not. And there's also AI NPR-based apps where, for example, soft skills, you would give someone feedback, and then later you would see yourself giving someone feedback, right? So from a third-person view, benchmark to some kind of perfect feedback situation. And I think that's even more scary. So you can even see yourself from the outside doing it wrong, probably.
Yeah, back in the day, we used to use video cameras and we would record ourselves, right? And then you would watch yourself on video and then see yourself, and of course, we're the biggest critiques of ourselves. So it's super powerful. But answering some of oh, sorry, Peter, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that this is possibly where adaptive learning goes. So some of you may be familiar with these platforms that adapt the learning as you go through the overall program, and typically today they are based on assessment scores. You get to a part of the program and you do an assessment, and then it adapts the next part of the learning for you. But I think what Simon's talking about there is that it will actually look into your performance as you start to complete the learning, and we see some of that technology effectively coming through some of that simulation work that I was talking about earlier, that you do a simulation with no humans involved, with a virtual human, and depending on how you progress through those decision trees, the kind of answers you give, and depends on how well you do, and then it starts to form a view of your skill. Now, if you can start to use that view of your skill, then on where you go next in the adaptation of the learning, then you're starting to get true machine-based adaptive learning, and I think that will be really interesting going forward.
Absolutely, and I want to also start to address some of the questions that we have, and that people are asking in the panel. But I think that's where, when we start to think about kind of what AI can be used for, I think what's interesting is we talk about the future of AI. A couple of questions here about what is AI really capable of today, and where do we see it going? Is it really just about assessing students, personalization? And Rens, I'm curious to get your thoughts about where you see AI kind of evolving, where it is, in your honest opinion, what is it really good for today, and where do you see it going, in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so honestly, it's in the AI space, it's hard to predict. We jumped in 2 years ago in this space, and at the time most models were really bad, right? So chatbots for most companies were still forced choice chatbots where you could do A or B, and now it's changing with GPT-3 and other language models are changing really fast. But I think what's going to happen is way better ways of knowledge mapping. So understanding a body of knowledge, the structure of that. So you can make it more personal. So for example, you want to study finance. So what is underneath finance? Actually, there's maybe 50 topics underneath, and for every topic it has 50 other subtopics underneath. And for most people, some of those will be relevant. So certain paths are really relevant, and a lot of other paths are not. And that is one of the key issues now, I think, in MOOCs, that there's too much noise, there's too much redundancy, and therefore it's not engaging enough. And if you can start to really understand a body of knowledge, and you need graph neural nets for it, so it's pretty new, it is all coming up now. But that would allow you to actually really tailor specific content for specific users. And then, of course, with what Peter said, having specific questions that where skills can be assessed in adaptive ways. That's one thing. I think the second big thing is, and I'm also hoping for that, of course, is for chatbots to actually answer questions correctly. So to have these mentors really being valuable. And my expectation is that we'll be there in the next 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, I know you guys are building something like that, which is cool as well. So the interesting thing is, we're talking about AI from a learner perspective. And so maybe I want to also just kind of switch it on its head from also a delivery perspective. I think building off what you're saying, Rens, is there's so much content out there. Before, when we started the whole digital learning space, it used to be the teacher had the content and the students had to get the expert, and the expert gave the content. Now we actually have more content than we can ever imagine and know in our pocket. It's called Google. It's called Google or Wikipedia. And so, I think the age of knowledge dissemination is rapidly gone. And so this new age is not really about knowledge dissemination, but about the delivery. How do we deliver the content? Because it's the MOOC, it wasn't about the MOOC. It's the content is quality, but how it's being delivered to us in ways that are really interesting, experiential, impactful, participatory, and a bit more human, might I say, a bit more human. And so, that's the space that we've been really experimenting on. And we have dreams of, and plans to say, how do we apply AI in terms of how we deliver? So in the delivery side of it. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on the panel around how you're thinking about AI in the delivery of that training, development, engagement. And I hate to use the word just training, right? Because learning is more than just training. And so what are your thoughts about that?
From my perspective, Peter, you go. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, no worries. So I think a couple of thoughts. I think actually in the delivery space, I think it actually will be about the recommendations that come through to people will become more and more specific and more focused around that I get the right learning for me at the right level, because I think where we're struggling at the moment is at the right level. So it can be that I could be quite advanced in a particular skill, but I still get quite a range of learning, quite a range of learning recommendations. I think the other piece is around is to how far it goes in delivery in terms of being more immersive. Facebook invested a whole lot of money in Oculus, and we'll see whether they made the right bet or not. But we are starting to see increasingly the value in delivery of having more immersive deliveries. Give you an example of that. We had a factory being built. A 5G smart factory in Louisville in Texas. And we had a very similar factory in Estonia. Now, the factory wasn't quite finished in Texas, but we were already in the process of recruiting people. And we wanted to get them up and running on some of the machinery of some of what makes a smart factory different. And so what we did was we took a 360 camera to Estonia and recorded 360 videos, and then people have and we then took, as part of their onboarding in Louisville in Texas, the new people through those 360 videos so they can understand what they're going to be doing almost before the actual factory's been finished building. Yeah. So I think immersive could be important going forward.
Absolutely. And I think some of the questions in the chat really are also talking about just the different immersive technologies, AI, how we deliver things, but what is the right platform for adult learning, right? And so we talk about adult learning. Are there certain technologies, platforms for human? This is Sadesh's question, to help to learn and equip based on these skills. And what are you seeing in terms of your employees, given, I guess, Peter and Simon, you have hundreds of thousands of employees across the world. Are you seeing any differences or peculiarities around the right platforms or the right modalities for this to take place?
From my perspective, there's no single answer that works for everybody. So it really depends so much on many variables around what the nature of the learning is, what the size of the company is, what the available investment is, what type of skills are we talking about? Are they manual skills, factory skills that Peter was talking about? Are they knowledge workers and it's knowledge skills? Are they in an office environment? Are they out in the field? There's so many variables there that I think you have to take all of those into account to then figure out what's the right platform to deliver the learning, but also then what's the right medium for which the training or learning should take place. That there's so many different variables there that you need to consider, and one small change in those variables could completely change what the right solution is. So training 100,000 people who are all in one location in an office would be very different from training 100,000 people distributed throughout the world. Then add distributed throughout the world, but speaking different languages, you've got a whole different dimension there. So it's one different variable, and the solution may have to look completely different. So yeah, I think it's very hard to say, yeah, the answer is go and buy platform X. Sorry, Rens.
No, so yeah, obviously the recommendation had to be very clear, but I agree, and to make it worse even, right, without these variables that Simon was mentioning, which are obviously important, also between individual learners, like there's a lot of differences between what people want. So we're doing a lot of surveys on KIMO, and every time we're asking people technically what they're looking for, and why are you here? Like, is it with a clear goal to get a new job, or is it just for fun? And there's a lot of heterogeneity in those answers, right? People are really different. Some people really prefer articles that are max 5 minutes long. Others prefer like 10-minute videos from only from MIT. So there's very specific requests and very different context to why people are there in the first place. That makes it pretty difficult. But therefore, I think the right bet would be on a system that would be able to capture those trends, and therefore would be able to recommend everything. So in the long run, you would be able to see what the real trends are going to be for specific groups. But of course, that still has to be built. But that's the I think I would put my money there.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, Rens, and Simon as well. And that's really why I mentioned that it's actually about having a variety engine these days, and it's actually about finding the right type of delivery modality for the type of situation that you're in, and the type of target learners that you've got, and actually also about the depth of skill that you want to build. So we have 7 critical skill areas that we think are really important for Ericsson globally. Now we dive deeper into and have a greater variety, if you like, of learning modalities associated with those 7 critical skill areas. So I think depth of skill, and then but also providing variety is the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it speaks to, what makes us human. We're all so different. Our makeup is different, where we come from, and our context is very different. Our intrinsic motivations are different, and how we even engage with content and different personality and styles are really different. And so given that, and we're talking about agility versus definition, so there's this really, I would say, healthy tension between wanting to define, like you said, Peter, 7 skills, for Ericsson, versus the agility and the openness of new skills that we don't even imagine happening. So there's a few questions in here about how do we see skills taxonomies, or, because you want to also, there needs to be some boundaries within an organizational context, otherwise you can't do anything. So some of the questions then around how do you think about, the right rhythm, or the right way to evolve some of these things, understanding the need for openness and curiosity. Any thoughts around that?
Can kick us off. So I think there's 2 bits in my mind. So that there's one of, I guess, a recognition that skills are going to be constantly changing, and technical skills worth differentiating between sort of power skills or soft skills and technical skills, because the power skills or soft skills are probably more enduring, of communication or leadership or whatever. Technical skills are getting faster and faster. So that if skills are constantly changing, then where do you focus? And for us within Novartis, that's where curiosity comes in, and that's sort of the notion behind the book. Is if you can create curiosity in people, then that will then be the enduring skill that carries on, and the curiosity, and under that the sort of learning how to learn, and actually getting the motivation to learn. Then as the skills change, you'll feel far more in control, because you've realized, I learned these skills, I was curious about that, and I learned that, and it gives you then the confidence to be able to sort of work through. So no matter what the skills are, no matter what the new things that you add into your taxonomy, actually, if you've got a culture of continuous learning, a culture of curiosity, then you're going to be able to do it either at an individual level or at an organization level.
And I guess at the heart of this question is how do you avoid complete chaos in these taxonomies if they're kind of constantly dynamic? And I think that is right. You have to, I think to some extent, you have to distinguish between your ontology, or the whole bank of possible skills that are changing, where you're constantly searching for those emerging skills and so on, and what you have as your fixed taxonomy in a business at any one point in time. And one has to constantly, one does have to update the other. I think you have to build some accountability and governance as well across these taxonomies. And that means that, when you update your job roles, there has to be some level of accountability and responsibility within the organization. So, we currently have job role owners. I think we have 80 odd job role owners within the business. We're actually thinking at the moment, do we actually have what we call skill area owners as well, that are responsible for, if you like, being which skills we bring in and which skills we don't within the taxonomy. So that's the sort of ideas where you can perhaps help to limit the chaos.
Yeah, and I like what Peter's saying here. So traditionally, the first list of skills I think are probably government-led list of skills, right? And you have World Economic Forum that has like a top 5 or top X list of skills, but as long as it's done by human beings, then the list always makes intuitive sense, but is always very limited. And now the opposite is that a lot of companies are sort of having AI generated lists of skills, which tend to be 50,000 skills or more. The downside is that it can get quite messy. So we have, of course, a list like that as well, and we know the list that other players have. But some of the things in that list, I can promise you, should not be in that list. It was made by an AI. There's a lot of weird stuff in there, so you would need a human being to still check if that sort of makes sense. And then, of course, what Peter said, okay, so we have 50,000 skills, but some of these are more relevant to Ericsson. And what Simon said, some of these are maybe meta-level skills, like curiosity. They may not be the same as, let's say, Python. So there's still some human judgment there that would be needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, when we think about some of the questions in the chat too around AI, and what do we see as the role of AI or technology when it comes to the digital divide or just diversity in general? Because we're kind of working from a certain kind of perspective right now. So if we were to kind of go adjacent to that, what is the role of AI of making this continuous lifelong learning acceptable and inclusive to as many people as possible, whether it's socioeconomic or neurodiversity, etc.? So what are your thoughts there?
Big question. So I think there's a few different dimensions in there. So I guess there's an element of not just AI, but I guess technology making access to education more accessible to people. So that's got to be a positive, but that's not just AI there. I think there's the diversity aspect of AI learning from humans, and this comes back to what Rens was saying earlier, that if it's learning from humans, then it picks up our bad habits as well, and that includes our biases, unfortunately. So there's then the whole piece around how do you de-bias the AI so that it's not it's not actually making the situation worse and perpetuating or amplifying biases that may be there. So I think that the whole ethics around AI is something that's becoming increasingly important. You mentioned earlier the sort of AI car, and where does it drive? If it needs to run down someone, is it the old person or the young person or whatever? So these are big ethical questions that AI will need to work through, so that the whole diversity aspect and the ethics behind it and so forth.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point, Simon. I think around the more machine learning that we have, how do you ensure that the machine learning that is built in takes account of diversity and puts everybody on a level playing field? I think there are some real positives associated with AI as well, particularly around opportunities. If we're saying that major way of learning is to gather experiences, then actually giving people common access to opportunities, I think, is important. And how many times have those of you on this call have said, right, I've got a vacancy coming up, I'm thinking of that person over there. And actually what some of AI does is open this all up for everybody. So I think that there are some real positives here, but there's some areas to be careful of as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to just throw you a question, Rens, around this, because as part of KIMO, is given this very complex challenge, I think we are very pro AI, pro technology on this panel, right? In terms of supportive of many different technologies. So as someone who has expertise, right, in AI, how do we manage these risks? And from a technologist perspective, how should we be thinking about this? To try to minimize, mitigate, understand, manage. We may not, I think it's impossible to mitigate all the risk, right? But how should we be thinking about this?
It's also a very big question with a lot of unknowns, right? So I think the biggest risk in this phase, in my mind, is this whole personal data question. And of course, the simple answer is we have GDPR and we follow the rules. But it's a bit more complex than that. And because what we actually don't really know is what kind of context of the user, or maybe personality profiles, or prior test scores, or jobs that they have actually relates to what kind of content they want. So we don't even really know what kind of data set to build in order to get the right recommendation. So what I'm expecting is that people will play with this, connect this to MBTI, connect this to this, connect this to your anything else, to see if that would enhance the recommendations. That is the tricky part, because that is personal data and it can be misused. So one of the good ways to mitigate that, in my view, is to use as less or as little personal data as possible. For example, these jobs that break down into skills. For us, that is not really personal data. It's technically jobs data that is from the web. It's not necessarily about the person. So with these workarounds, you could limit that a bit. Of course, as a company, you want to have very clear values. You want to have a culture that respects those things. You want everybody trained on GDPR, but it's ongoing, and everybody will be trying to build better models. So it's an interesting race.
No, and I think that's great. And what it kind of points to is, obviously it's the data that we put in. And so as we're collecting more and more data, and using technologies and different platforms to collect more data, we'll just get smarter about these things as we understand kind of the risks, the consequences, so that the humans ultimately who are making these decisions are more informed as we're making these decisions. And so, nothing is black and white. And so, I think some of the key things, and I see Wei Min here who's giving me the signal to wrap up soon. But just to summarize, I know we've literally covered such a huge gamut of conversations, and the topics we could probably spend hours on each one. But just maybe some of the key takeaways that I have from this conversation is really, I think, about the evolving skills engine. The idea of this evolving skills engine and the opportunity to leverage AI to help us better inform this evolving skills engine was, I think, a really interesting point, number one. I think the second one is really the linkage now between jobs, skills, and I'm going to call it being human. and understanding kind of the intersection of those things. And this interplay is going to be absolutely critical. And I think that the last point is around levels of personalization and recognizing that not all learners are created equally. And so kind of having a variety, a multimodal approach in delivery, as well as in the access to content is going to be absolutely critical. So those are some of the 3 takeaways that I had, and it's been such an enjoyable conversation. I wish we could talk for a few hours more, but I think Wei Min is giving me the eye, so I'm going to wrap it up here. But thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep, so sorry for breaking everyone's fun over here, but still, thank you, So Young, for the wonderful interaction with the speakers. It is really amazing to see that there's just so many responses from the ground, you know, from the chat to the Q&A box. So this goes to show that the topic of education does interest everyone greatly, and we will definitely be looking to do more on it. With that said, I would like to represent SGInnovate to thank So Young again, and to all the attendees who have stayed with us till now. Also, a big thank you to Rens, Peter, and Simon for the great insights and discussion points shared by everyone. For the attendees, once again, do keep a lookout for our post-event mail, which will contain a recording of this session. Do reach out to us at events@sginnovate.com if you would like to connect with any of our speakers or to have a chat with us for collaboration opportunities. Do also to give us your post-event feedback when you exit the webinar or through the post-event mail as well. With that said, this is Wei Min signing out from this webinar. Hope that everyone will have a great day ahead. Stay safe, stay healthy. Hope to have you again in our next section. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.